In many cultures, dreams are just dreams, random images, fleeting thoughts. But in some tradition, dreams can be warnings. They can be messages from the spirit world, glimpses into something far beyond our understanding. Some dreams are so real that they linger even after waking up, leaving behind an unsettling feeling that something or someone is trying to reach you. Tonight's story is about a young boy who unknowingly carried a connection to the spirit world. It all started with nightmares. At first, they seemed like nothing more than bad dreams. But when the visions started to bleed into real life, he realized they were something far worse, a warning of what was to come. This is a chilling, true story of supernatural encounters, cultural beliefs, and the unseen forces that lurk just beyond our world. This story took place back in 1998, when gang activity was at an all-time high in our small Southeast Asian community. Drive-by shootings were happening frequently in our neighborhood. I don't know how things got so bad. Our neighbor had a son named Chen, who was shot and killed in their driveway. Chen came home around 1 a.m., unaware that he was being followed. The moment he stepped out of his car, he was shot dead. Chen's friends and gang suspected who was responsible, so they retaliated, injuring several members of a rival gang. There was a lot of bloodshed. But the real question is, what were they even fighting for? Money? No one really had money back then. Their neighborhood? No one actually owned any land or houses around here. Colors? Just shooting anyone wearing a color they didn't like? I don't know. These are the questions I still ask myself to this day. I was young at the time, around 12 years old, and in middle school when Chen was killed. My siblings and I were asleep when it happened, so I didn't hear anything. It was my parents who got up to see what was going on when the cops and paramedics arrived, trying to save Chen. I was never into gangs because my father was a very strict man. If I had hung out with the wrong crowd, he would have beaten me. Looking back, I'm grateful to him for that. At the time, I also didn't realize I had shamanic guiding spirits or some kind of sixth sense. But now, as a shaman, I understand that some spirits seek help from those they know can see them. Like I said, I wasn't aware that Chen had been killed, and my parents never told me or my siblings. So one evening, while doing my homework in my room, something strange happened. Our house had a crawl space, and my bedroom had a window that was too high for anyone outside to reach. Yet that night, I heard a knocking at my window. I assumed it was my father in the backyard, so I went to look, and saw Chen. His face had a strange light green tinge. He smiled at me and said, "Hey, do you want to come out for a smoke?" I told him I couldn't because my parents were in the living room, and if I went outside, I'd get in trouble. "Come on," he insisted. "Just a quick smoke, and I'll help you get back in through the window." Chen was 17 when he was shot, and at 12, I had always looked up to him like a big brother since we lived next to each other. I went to close my bedroom door so my parents and siblings wouldn't know I was sneaking out. But when I came back to the window, Chen was gone. I looked outside, nothing. I called his name, no answer. Over the next few nights, I noticed a lot of friends and family gathering outside his house. It wasn't until I attended the funeral with my parents that I realized Chen was in the casket. I was shocked and felt like I was going to vomit. I was scared. When we got home, I told my parents about what had happened that night while I was doing my homework. My father immediately tied red corn at our windows and doors to keep spirits from entering our home. We believed that red corns kept ghosts and spirits away. My parents started talking about moving because of the heavy gang activity in our area. But during the house hunting process, my oldest sister Paula got married, delaying everything due to the chaos of a traditional wedding. Paula's husband was a gangster, and my parents had issues with the marriage, but eventually, things worked out. Many gang members at the time turned their lives around after getting married and having kids. My parents hoped their new son-in-law would do the same. After multiple drive-by shootings in our poor neighborhood, my parents finally moved us to the countryside. That was when I noticed something. We no longer woke up to police sirens. But living in the countryside also introduced me to something else: the paranormal. The houses in the countryside were much older. My parents never asked when the house was built because, compared to the homes in Southeast Asia, every house in America seemed new and modern to them. Our new house was a light yellow one with a brown door. I won't go into too much detail since that would ruin the story, but I remember feeling an overwhelming sense of loneliness when we first moved in, something I couldn't quite explain. By then, I was 14 years old. We were far from my friends and my old school, so my parents bought my little brother George and me a PlayStation 2 to keep us entertained and out of trouble. One night I was in my room playing a game with the bedroom door wide open. George was in the living room watching TV with my parents, while my two younger sisters were in their room. As I played, I suddenly saw one of my sisters run past my door toward the living room. Something white was wrapped around her neck. My two sisters, Cherry and Mai, were 6 and 8 years old, and they shared a metal bunk bed. I saw Cherry, the 8-year-old, run past my room, and she had that long, white thing around her neck. A few minutes later, she walked past my door again, still with that white thing around her neck. I thought it was strange. I paused my game and went to check on my sisters. They were in their room, painting seashells. I asked Cherry, "Did you just walk past my room with something white around your neck?" She looked at me, confused. "No." Mai nodded. "We've been in here the whole time." I was puzzled. As I walked back to my room, I noticed something white sticking out of the bathroom doorway. I picked it up. The bathroom door was wide open. It was a long piece of toilet paper. I turned on the bathroom light. No one was there. I thought it was strange, but I just flushed the toilet paper and went back to my game. That night, I was sleeping when I suddenly woke up to the sound of a woman giggling in the hallway. I looked over at George, but he was sleeping with his back turned toward me. I tried to wake him up, but he was a deep sleeper, and I couldn't. Then I heard the giggling and whispering again, coming from the hallway. I got up, opened the door, and stepped into the dark hallway. But when I looked around, it wasn't our hallway anymore. It was a long, dimly lit corridor with white candles hanging along the walls. The whispering and giggling continued. I could hear a voice whispering, "Let her die so she can guard the house." I called out, "Hello?" but no one answered. The only sound was the giggling, coming from the door at the very end of the dark and hazy hallway. No matter how much I walked toward it, the door remained just as far away, as if I were walking in place. Then the whispering grew louder. "Let her die so she can guard the house." The words repeated over and over, mixed with laughter echoing around me. Suddenly the door at the end of the hallway creaked open. A shadow emerged. A small boy stood in the doorway, silently staring at me. Then without warning, he ran toward me at an unnatural speed. He looked like a shadow, his body naked except for a diaper. He reached me and wrapped his arms around my leg. When I looked down, he gazed up at me with a pale white face. "Please don't let me die, Uncle," he pleaded. At that moment, I woke up. It had been a dream. I turned to see George stirring on the floor before climbing back onto his bed. He often moved around a lot in his sleep, so he must have fallen off. Maybe the sound of him hitting the floor was what woke me up. That house always gave me bad dreams. A few days later, my parents were outside gardening. I watched my father placing sticks into the ground, as if he was building a trellis for the blackberries he had planted. Later that day, my parents went to the store, telling us to stay home and not go anywhere. When they returned, they brought back supplies for the backyard. My father had bought 2 packs of white rope to make the trellis. He placed the ropes on the dining table and left them there, seemingly in no rush to start his project. That night, as I was sleeping, I heard giggling again, like someone whispering and laughing right outside my door. A voice murmured, "Don't let her come." Then more giggling. I woke up and immediately realized I was still in a dream. For some reason, I felt aware, like I had control over myself in this dream. I looked around. George was on the floor again, sleeping. Then, I noticed something strange. A flickering glow beneath the door. Candlelight. I got out of bed and saw a shadow moving away from the door. I hurried and opened it. Once again, I found myself in that long hallway with candles hanging on both sides. Unlike before, this hallway had no doors, except for one at the far end. I heard whispering again, "Don't let her come." It was followed by faint giggling. I wonder what the voice meant. Don't let her come? Who is her? I kept walking toward the door when suddenly a child's voice called out, "Uncle!" I stopped and turned around. No one was there. Then the voice spoke again, "Uncle, don't let me die." For some reason, I started running toward the door, but no matter how much I ran, it remained impossibly far away. It felt like I was sprinting in place. Finally, after what seemed like forever, I reached it. I grabbed the doorknob. It was ice cold. I twisted it and pushed the door open. Giggling filled the air. Inside, I saw my 2 sisters' room. Their bunk bed was in the same place as in real life, but at the foot of the bed stood my older sister, Paula, the one who had gotten married to her gangster husband. She wore a white dress, her body hanging lifelessly. She had already hung herself, but as soon as I stepped into the room, she suddenly lifted her head and began giggling. Blood trickled from her eyes as she smiled. "Don't let her come," she whispered. I jolted awake. It felt as if my soul had traveled to a different dimension of the same place. I looked over and saw George crawling back into bed. It was all so strange. Now that I am a shaman, I understand that my spirit guides were trying to show me something. But back then, I thought it was just a bad dream. The spirit realm is mysterious and terrifying. I had so many nightmares that I eventually stopped fearing them. That's why I never told my parents about what I saw. One day, Paula showed up at our house crying. She had a black eye, even though she had tried to cover it with makeup. She broke down in front of my parents. They scolded her, reminding her that she hadn't listened to them. Paula was already 6 months pregnant at the time. That day, her husband had wanted to go out with his friends, but she didn't let him. They got into an argument, which turned into a fight. My mother told Paula to stay with us for a few days, until her husband came to apologize and beg her to go back. The next day was Monday. At school, something strange happened. It was 10 a.m., and we had a short break before our next class. As I was walking back from the bathroom toward my locker, a guy I had never seen before walked up to me and kicked me in the leg. I had no idea who he was. We had no history, no problems. Without thinking, I threw a punch and we started fighting. We ended up on the ground until the staff came and broke us apart. We were both sent to the office, where they asked us what had happened. I told them the truth. Then they asked the other guy why he kicked me. His answer? I don't know. He had no explanation. He just walked up and did it. The school staff didn't believe us. They thought we were hiding something. Since the guy had no prior record of fighting, they called our parents to pick us up. His mother came right away. But when they tried to call my mom, no one answered, So they called the next emergency contact, my aunt. About 30 minutes later, my aunt arrived to pick me up. When we got home, I knocked on the door and my mother answered. "Why didn't you pick up the phone?" I asked. She told me that she and Paula had just gotten back from the store. I explained what had happened at school. My mother listened and believed me. She knew I wasn't a troublemaker. After listening to my trouble at school, my aunt went home. That afternoon, around 2 p.m., my mother left to pick up George and my two sisters from school, leaving me home with Paula. Paula was staying in my younger sister's room. I was in my room playing a game, with my bedroom door wide open. About 10 minutes after my mother left, I saw Paula walk past my door toward the living room. A moment later, she walked past my door again, but this time she was carrying something. I didn't get a good look, but I thought I saw a white rope, the same kind my father had bought for his garden. At first, I didn't think much of it. Then, I suddenly remembered my dream. I paused my game and ran to my sister's room. The door was locked. I called her name. No answer. I kicked the door open. Paula had tied the rope to the bunk bed, but she hadn't done anything yet. When she saw me, she broke down crying. I ran to her, hugged her, and told her not to do it. I sat with her, talking about her depression and the problems in her marriage. She made me promise not to tell anyone what had just happened. I promised. A few days later, Paula's husband and some of their elders came to our house to beg Paula to come back. It's a cultural thing. The two sides usually try to work things out to fix a broken marriage, instead of letting a divorce happen. They told us that they had already lectured her husband and that they would no longer help him if he misbehaved again. Before they left that day, I had a one-on-one conversation with my brother-in-law. I told him what had happened, and he started sobbing. He admitted that he hadn't originally planned to go out with his friends that day, but it was something he felt he had to do. He didn't tell me exactly what they had done, but from the way he spoke, it seemed like they had gone out to hurt someone for one of their friends. However, according to my brother-in-law, that was the last thing he would ever do for his gang, a favor he owed them. After Paula and her husband had their first baby boy, her husband stopped hanging out with his gangs. They named their son Kevin. For some reason, Kevin always loved me and preferred me over anyone else. He reminded me of the boy in my dream, the one who kept calling me uncle. That's all for this video. Thank you for making all the way through and supporting my stories. Have a wonderful day or night.